What happens when pride collides with reality? A manager desperate to impress a Chinese tycoon finds himself humiliated until an unexpected voice in perfect Mandarin changes everything. The first call came at 7:42 in the morning. Richard Kessler was halfway through his second espresso when the hotel receptionist rushed into his office, face pale, clutching a notepad. "Mr. Kessler," she stammered, "you're not going to believe this." "He's coming." Today, Richard frowned. "Who's coming?" "Speak clearly, the Chinese businessman. The one with the fortune. The one scouting properties on the West Coast. He'll be here by noon." The words dropped like a stone in Richard's stomach. He placed the cup down so hard it rattled against the saucer. "Noon? As in 4 hours from now? And you're telling me this now?" The receptionist shifted uneasily. "We just got confirmation. His assistant emailed at dawn. He wants to see the presidential suite, the ballroom, everything." Richard leaned back, rubbing his temples. This was supposed to be his hotel's golden chance. A single client who could change everything. If the millionaire liked what he saw, the property could secure the kind of long-term deal that would make investors grin for years. But there was one glaring problem. Richard didn't speak a single word of Mandarin. He'd spent months preparing for visits from wealthy Americans, Europeans, even a Saudi prince who never showed up. But he hadn't thought about China. Not seriously. And now, with less than 4 hours on the clock, he had no translator, no cultural advisor, and no backup plan. The espresso suddenly tasted bitter. He sprang to his feet, storming out of his office. Staff scattered as he moved down the hallway, barking orders. "Get the ballroom polished. Double-check the chandeliers. Make sure housekeeping touches up the suite. And find me someone, anyone, who can bridge this language gap." "Should we call the university?" one concierge asked timidly. "They might have a student." Richard cut him off. "A student? Number. I need someone professional, someone who can impress him, not embarrass us." The hotel lobby already hummed with its usual morning rhythm. Guests lined up for coffee, bellhops carted luggage across the polished floor, and the scent of fresh pastries drifted from the cafe. But under that surface calm, Richard's mind raced. He checked his watch. 3 hours, 58 minutes. This wasn't just about hospitality. This was survival. His career hinged on it. The general manager of the Kessler Grand Hotel, a title he had fought for, could not afford to look incompetent in front of a billionaire. As he paced, his mind churned with fear and strategy. Should he bluff? Use hand gestures? Try some clumsy English Mandarin dictionary app on his phone? Every idea sounded ridiculous. Every second wasted made his chest tighten further. And that's when he noticed her. Near the far side of the lobby, bent over a cleaning cart, was a figure he barely registered most days. She wore the standard uniform, black dress and white apron, her hair neatly tied back. She was polishing the brass rails along the staircase, moving with quiet focus. Richard barely gave her a second glance. To him, she was just another maid, one of dozens he supervised indirectly. But in a few short hours, she would hold the key to saving his reputation. He didn't know it yet, but the clock was already ticking, and the one person he overlooked daily was about to rewrite everything. Richard Kessler wasn't just any hotel manager. At 44, he carried himself with the polish of a man who believed in appearances. His navy suits were tailored in Los Angeles, his shoes imported from Italy, and his hair always combed back with meticulous precision. Guests saw charm and confidence when he strolled through the marble lobby of the Kessler Grand Hotel in Sacramento. But behind closed doors, Richard carried a gnawing truth. He was constantly one step away from losing control. He had climbed the hospitality ladder with grit, not charm. Born in Bakersfield to a mechanic father and a mother who worked night shifts at a diner, Richard spent his early 20s scrubbing bathrooms at a roadside motel. He swore he would never stay invisible forever. Over the years, he learned the power of image. Smile wide, shake hands firmly, and act as though you belonged in the room even if your stomach was in knots. That formula carried him up the ranks until he was finally named general manager of the family-owned luxury property in Sacramento. But the hotel wasn't doing as well as it looked on the outside. Occupancy rates dipped. Competing chains offered flashier amenities. Investors were circling like hawks, pressuring Richard to prove he could attract serious clientele. So when rumors spread that an international billionaire was touring properties along the West Coast, Richard knew this was his moment. His chance to prove he wasn't just another caretaker in a collapsing business, but a leader who could bring prestige and money through the front door. There was just one complication: Richard's pride. He hated asking for help. He believed control was everything. Delegating too much made him nervous. Depending on others felt like weakness. It was why he'd never bothered to learn Mandarin or hire anyone fluent on staff, despite knowing that wealthy Chinese tourists were flocking to California more than ever before. To him, it felt like admitting he wasn't prepared, and Richard lived in constant fear of being seen as unprepared. Now that decision had come back to haunt him. By mid-morning, his office desk was littered with papers, schedules, and hastily scribbled phone numbers. He dialed one contact after another: a local interpreter agency, a corporate partner, even an old acquaintance who once bragged about studying abroad in Shanghai. No luck. Everyone was either unavailable or demanded more time than he had. His assistant poked her head in. "Sir, the suite is being touched up. Maintenance says the chandelier bulbs have been replaced. The kitchen is prepping samples for the lunch tasting." Richard barely heard her. He stared at the phone in his hand like it was a sinking lifeboat. "This has to go perfectly," he muttered. "If I blow this, we're finished. The investors will have my head." The assistant hesitated. "What if we just let him bring his own translator?" Richard's jaw tightened. "And look incompetent?" "Absolutely not. This hotel must appear flawless, from the valet outside to the wine list on the table. We can't rely on outsiders to make us look professional." He dismissed her with a wave, but deep down, panic swelled in his chest. His whole life had been about proving he wasn't small-town Richard from Bakersfield anymore, that he deserved to stand at the top. Yet, here he was, scrambling, terrified that in just a few hours, a wealthy stranger from another country would see right through him. But life has a strange way of humbling you, especially when help comes from the last place you'd ever expect. By 9:15 a.m., the news had spread beyond Richard's office walls. Word of the mysterious guest was now moving like wildfire through the staff. Bellhops whispered near the luggage carts, receptionists straightened their ties, and housekeepers scrubbed rooms with a nervous energy. The Kessler Grand, which normally carried the calm rhythm of routine, suddenly felt like a stage before opening night. The official email arrived in Richard's inbox at 9:27 a.m. sharp. It came from Liang Wei, the assistant to the businessman. Polite, short, and direct. "Mr. Chen will arrive today at 12 p.m. He wishes to see the presidential suite, ballroom, kitchen, and staff accommodations. He values discretion. Please be punctual." Richard read the message 3 times, his pulse hammering harder with each line. The businessman's name was finally revealed: Chen Jihao, a figure he'd only read about in business journals. Real estate tycoon, tech investor, philanthropist. A man whose decisions could swing millions of dollars in or out of any deal he touched. And Chen Jihao had chosen his hotel. Richard shoved back his chair and marched into the operations office. "Listen up," he barked. "This is not just another guest. This man has the resources to buy 3 hotels like ours before lunch. I want every inch of this building spotless. The presidential suite should shine like a diamond. The ballroom floor polished until you can see your reflection. The kitchen must be ready to serve samples fit for royalty." Staff nodded, scribbled notes, and scattered into action. The pressure was contagious. Even the veteran employees, people who'd worked through political visits and celebrity galas, felt the air grow heavier. By 10 a.m., the lobby was buzzing with activity. Maintenance climbed ladders to dust vents that hadn't been touched in months. A florist rushed in with fresh arrangements of lilies and orchids. Valets wiped down every luxury car that parked under the awning. The hotel was transforming in real time, as though a royal inspection was minutes away. But beneath the surface frenzy, Richard's real problem remained unsolved. He stood at the reception desk, scanning the polished counters, the sparkling chandeliers, the uniformed staff lined up like soldiers. Everything looked perfect. Everything except the one thing he couldn't control: language. He rehearsed greetings in his head. "Welcome to the Kessler Grand. We are honored by your presence." Each phrase felt clumsy, powerless. He pictured himself fumbling through broken English while Chen Jihao stared in silence, unimpressed. The thought made his palms sweat. "Sir?" a concierge asked softly. Should we prepare gift baskets for his suite? Imported wines? Maybe. Do it, Richard snapped. Make it look thoughtful but not desperate. The concierge hurried off. Richard straightened his tie, his reflection staring back at him in the brass elevator doors. For years, he had convinced himself that success was about control. If he worked harder, dressed sharper, demanded more, he could bend circumstances to his will. But this was different. He couldn't fake fluency. He couldn't bluff cultural respect. He couldn't command Mandarin out of thin air. He checked his watch. 2 hours and 30 minutes left. And somewhere, just beyond the lobby's polished floors, the one person who could solve his problem was still pushing a cart of linens down the hallway, unnoticed. But sometimes, the people you ignore the most are the ones holding the lifeline you're desperately searching for. By 10:30 a.m., the Kessler Grand felt like it was bracing for an earthquake. Every department was in motion. The kitchen clattered with pots and pans as chefs argued over menu samples. Housekeepers rushed down the hallways with baskets of linens, spraying polish on every surface that glistened under the morning sun. Even the parking attendants outside whispered nervously, checking their uniforms twice. Richard stalked through the ballroom like a general on inspection. That rug, he barked. Straighten it. And those curtains, do they look like they've been steamed? No? Then why are you standing here? Move. His voice carried, sharp enough to make a busboy flinch and nearly drop a tray of glasses. The staff was used to Richard's intensity, but today felt different. Today, his edge had no patience, no buffer. The weight of Chen Jihao's arrival was pressing down on him like a vice. In the suite upstairs, a team was frantically fluffing pillows, aligning the curtains, and checking the minibar twice over. Richard stormed in, just as a housekeeper was smoothing the bedspread. "Is that wrinkle supposed to be there?" he snapped. The woman froze. "No, sir." "I'll fix it." "Fix it now," he muttered, pacing the room. "If Mr. Chen sees a single crease, he'll think we're amateurs." One of his senior assistants, a woman named Janine, followed him into the hallway. "Richard, you're going to give yourself a stroke. The hotel looks incredible. Everything is under control." "Under control?" he hissed, lowering his voice. "You think any of this matters if I can't even speak to the man? Do you understand what's at stake? This isn't just a client. This is the client. If he walks away unimpressed, our investors will be gone before the week is out." Janine softened. "Then let him bring his own interpreter. Just focus on showing him the property." Richard shook his head. "No, that makes us look second-rate. If we can't provide something as basic as communication, why would he trust us with anything else?" She didn't answer. She knew Richard's pride was stronger than reason. By 11 a.m., the lobby was spotless. Guests were being gently steered away from areas Chen was expected to tour. Security discreetly hovered near entrances. The staff lined up like soldiers, waiting for the moment. But Richard wasn't breathing easier. He was breathing faster. He ducked into his office, shut the door, and gripped the edge of his desk. His reflection stared back at him from the glass surface. A man who had built his entire career on control, now staring at the one weakness he couldn't patch with polish. He whispered to himself, almost in prayer, "Just let this work. Please. Let me hold it together." Out in the hallway, unnoticed, Marcia Bennett pushed her cart past his door. A quiet presence, steady, invisible. She had heard the rumors about the important guest. She had seen the frenzy of staff, but unlike them, she wasn't panicked. She simply kept moving, quietly humming to herself as she stacked fresh towels, her mind far away. Richard didn't even glance at her as she passed. He was too consumed by his own storm. But storms have a way of breaking things open, and Richard's would soon break in a way he never expected. While Richard's world spun faster with every tick of the clock, Marcia Bennett's morning looked very different. She had started her shift at 6 a.m., same as always, wheeling her cart into the quiet corridors before most guests were even awake. At 41, Marcia wasn't new to hard work. She had spent nearly 2 decades in hospitality, laundry rooms, banquet cleanups, late-night shifts, scrubbing bathrooms while wealthier people slept soundly. She never complained. Her job didn't come with applause, but it came with dignity, and she valued that more than anything. She lived across the river in West Sacramento with her teenage son, Deshaun. Every paycheck went toward bills, groceries, and saving for his college fund. She never asked for recognition at work. In fact, she preferred to blend into the background. The less attention, the better. Attention, in her experience, only complicated things. But what nobody at the Kessler Grand knew, not even Richard, who passed her in the hallways without so much as a nod, was that Marcia carried a hidden skill, a secret she rarely revealed. When she was a young woman, she'd attended community college in San Francisco. There, she met international students, including a group from China. At first, she helped them with English homework. Over time, they taught her Mandarin. She picked it up quickly, fascinated by the rhythm and precision of the language. What started as simple curiosity grew into fluency after years of practice, language courses, and tutoring Chinese-American families in exchange for childcare help. It wasn't something she bragged about. Why would she? Most of her coworkers barely looked at her cart, let alone asked about her life. They assumed Maid was all she could ever be. And Marcia was fine letting them think that. It kept things simple. On this particular morning, as she polished brass rails in the lobby, she overheard fragments of conversations. The millionaire's arriving at noon. He only speaks Mandarin. Richard's losing his mind. Marcia tucked the words away quietly. She could have spoken up. She could have told someone she understood Mandarin fluently, that she'd even volunteered at a local cultural center teaching basic phrases to kids. But she didn't. Why should she? No one had asked. And deep down, part of her bristled at the thought of being useful only when it suited others. Still, as she watched Richard storm past, barking orders, she felt something stir inside her, a mix of pity and frustration. The man strutted around like he owned the world, but right now, he looked like he was one missed step from collapse. Her co-worker Angela nudged her as they folded napkins for the ballroom. "You hear about the big shot coming?" "Yeah," Marcia replied calmly. "They say he's loaded. Like billionaire loaded. Richard's running around like his hair's on fire." Angela chuckled. Marcia gave a small smile, folding another napkin with careful precision. "Doesn't surprise me." She didn't mention the part that mattered most, that she, the invisible maid, could walk right up to this so-called untouchable guest and speak his language better than anyone else in the building. And as the clock crept toward noon, she wondered quietly if she should. But fate has a way of forcing decisions, and in just a few minutes, silence would no longer be an option for Marcia Bennett. At exactly 12:01 p.m., the black SUV pulled up to the front entrance of the Kessler Grand. The valet scrambled to open the door as Richard stood stiffly at the top of the steps, palms damp, tie perfectly straight. Out stepped Chen Jihao. He was shorter than Richard expected, but his presence carried weight. Sharp black suit, polished shoes, not a single movement wasted. Behind him trailed two assistants, both carrying sleek leather folders, eyes scanning everything. Richard plastered on a smile, stepping forward. "Welcome to the Kessler Grand, Mr. Chen," he said slowly, as if careful pronunciation could disguise his fear. Chen's expression remained unreadable. He turned to one assistant who leaned in to whisper in Mandarin. Richard caught none of it. The assistant translated, "Mr. Chen thanks you for the welcome." Richard nodded stiffly, guiding the group toward the lobby. Every step felt heavier. He pointed to the chandeliers, the marble flooring, the floral arrangements. "All prepared for your visit," he explained. The assistant murmured the translation, but the lag between words made Richard's stomach churn. The flow was broken, awkward. In the corner, polishing a table near the entrance, Marcia paused. She hadn't planned on being here at this exact moment, but as she watched Richard fumble through the translator, something inside her shifted. His forced smile, the assistant's clipped tone, Chen's faintly unimpressed glance. She could see where this was headed, and it wasn't good. They moved toward the ballroom. Richard gestured grandly. "Our space can accommodate 400 guests comfortably, perfect for galas, conferences." The translator repeated. Chen responded with a short burst of Mandarin. The assistant hesitated, fumbling for the right English words. He says, "Maybe it looks average." Richard's heart stopped. Average? His jaw clenched. This was slipping through his fingers. And that's when Marcia stepped forward. She cleared her throat softly, then spoke. "请问您希望看到什么特别的布置?" Her voice was steady, her accent crisp. The room froze. Every head turned toward her. Chen's eyebrows lifted, surprise flashing across his face. He answered her directly, his tone lighter, curious now. Marcia responded smoothly, matching his rhythm, nodding respectfully. What followed was a back-and-forth conversation, fluid, natural, effortless. Richard's mouth fell open. The staff looked on, stunned. This quiet maid, someone Richard had passed 100 times without a glance, was speaking Mandarin as though she had been born to it. Chen chuckled softly, the first hint of warmth he'd shown since arriving. He gestured toward the suite upstairs, inviting Marcia to continue walking with him. Richard, caught between humiliation and relief, trailed behind like an afterthought. The assistants whispered to each other, clearly impressed. One even scribbled a note. Richard's ears burned. As the group moved down the hallway, Marcia walked calmly at Chen's side, translating Richard's explanations with ease, adding respectful phrases of her own. She wasn't just a voice. She was bridging the gap Richard had been terrified of all morning, and in that moment, Richard realized the truth. The person he had overlooked every single day had just saved him from disaster, but salvation doesn't come free. And Richard was about to feel the sting of being humbled in front of everyone. The tour continued, but it was no longer Richard leading the charge. It was Marcia. Chen Jihao stayed close to her side, his sharp eyes softening every time she explained a detail. When they entered the presidential suite, Marcia gestured with confidence. 这里的窗户可以看到河景，非常适合早晨喝茶, she said, describing the river view as perfect for morning tea. Chen's lips curved into a faint smile. Richard stood stiffly in the background, pointing at amenities that nobody seemed to care about. Every time he spoke, Marcia's voice followed, smooth and respectful, adding cultural context that Richard never would have thought of. It was more than translation. She was making the hotel feel like home to Chen. One of the assistants leaned toward Chen. 她说得很流利, he murmured. She speaks fluently. Chen nodded, clearly impressed. Richard caught the tone, even if he couldn't catch the words. Each compliment aimed at Marcia felt like another crack in his carefully built armor. This was supposed to be his moment, his victory. And now the spotlight had shifted completely. When they reached the ballroom, Chen asked a long question in Mandarin, his gaze scanning the chandeliers. Richard waited for Marcia's translation. He wants to know if the kitchen can prepare a traditional banquet menu for Chinese guests, she said calmly. Richard blinked. Of course. Our chefs can adapt to anything, Marcia relayed the answer, but she didn't stop there. She added something more, offering reassurance in Mandarin that the hotel respected cultural traditions and could even bring in regional ingredients. Richard hadn't said any of that. She had expanded his answer, making him sound more thoughtful than he was. Chen nodded approvingly, clasping his hands behind his back. Richard's chest tightened. For years, he had told himself that leadership was about control, that staff like Marcia were just background players, cogs in the machine. But watching her now, he realized how wrong he'd been. She wasn't just helping him, she was carrying him. And everyone in the room could see it. When the tour ended, Chen shook Richard's hand politely. Then he turned to Marcia, bowing his head slightly in respect. He spoke a few words, his voice warm. Marcia translated softly, her eyes steady on Richard. He says he appreciates the hospitality. But more importantly, he appreciates being spoken to with respect in his own language. The weight of the words landed like a stone in Richard's gut. He forced a smile, nodding quickly. Chen left with his assistants, promising to be in touch. The black SUV rolled away. The lobby slowly returned to normal, but Richard couldn't shake what had just happened. He had nearly lost everything. And the only reason he hadn't was because of someone he'd never taken the time to see. For the first time in years, Richard felt something stronger than pride, shame. But shame can either crush you, or it can change you. And Richard was about to find out which path he would choose. The lobby emptied slowly. Staff returned to their posts, some still whispering about what they had just witnessed. For once, Richard didn't bark orders. He just stood near the reception desk, his thoughts louder than the chatter around him. Marcia was wheeling her cart back toward the service hallway when Richard finally called out, "Marcia!" She stopped, surprised. In all her years working at the hotel, he had never once said her name. He walked over, his usual swagger stripped away. You saved us today. Saved me." Marcia shrugged lightly, her expression calm. "I just did what needed to be done." "No," Richard insisted. "You did more than that. You gave him respect. Something I couldn't give, not with all the polish in the world." For a moment, silence hung between them. Richard shifted uncomfortably, unused to humility. I should have known. I should have seen you. All this time, I've been so focused on appearances that I forgot the value of people. He paused. I'm sorry. Marcia studied him. She wasn't someone who clung to apologies. Life had taught her to keep moving, not to wait for validation. Still, something in his voice felt genuine. She gave a small nod. Just remember this. People aren't invisible. Doesn't matter if they're scrubbing floors or signing checks. You never know what they're carrying with them. Richard exhaled, the weight of the morning finally sinking in. Her words pierced deeper than any investor's criticism ever had. He realized then that the lesson wasn't about Mandarin or even Chen Jihao. It was about respect, about seeing people fully, not just for their job titles or what they could provide in the moment. The next day, Richard did something nobody expected. He gathered the staff in the ballroom, not to scold, not to nitpick, but to acknowledge. I owe all of you thanks, he said, scanning the room. And I owe Marcia special thanks. She reminded me what true leadership looks like. It's not about control or image. It's about respect, about listening, about seeing the people around you. Some staff looked shocked. Others smiled quietly. And for the first time in years, Richard felt lighter. Marcia didn't crave the spotlight, but she accepted the applause with grace, not because she wanted recognition, but because she knew her son would be proud when he heard the story. Life at the Kessler Grand went on, but something had shifted. Richard carried himself differently. He asked questions. He learned names. He even downloaded a Mandarin app, determined to start with the basics. The truth was simple. One moment of humility had changed him more than a decade of ambition ever could. And maybe that's the lesson we all need to remember. You never know who holds the key to your next breakthrough. It might not be the person in the corner office or the one with the biggest paycheck. Sometimes it's the person you walk past every day without noticing. So here's the question. Who are you overlooking in your life right now? Who might be carrying a gift, a talent, or a perspective that you've been blind to? Respect costs nothing, but it can change everything. If this story spoke to you, share it with someone who might need the reminder. And don't forget, real strength isn't in control, it's in respect.